The following is a presentation of the Maine Department of Education School Finance Team, brought to you by the Maine School Management Association.
Good morning. Can you all hear me? Sometimes the mic thing has been a little weird this week. So as Paula said, my name is Donna Tyner. I've been with the team for about 3 years, and I took over the EPS formula from Paula. And I am going to try to break that down today to the simplest form and to show you that it's made up of just 3 things. It's legislation, data, and math. Those are the only 3 things you need. Unfortunately, there are a lot of little pieces of math that all have to come together to make it the whole. But we're going to try to make it as simple as possible to help you understand what goes into the formula, what we do behind the screens at DOE for the EPS formula. So it begins with, like I said, legislation. The Constitution of Maine says that every town is responsible to provide public education for the students in their towns. And then the legislature is the ones that have developed the EPS program and Services Act. And if we want changes to the EPS formula, that's where it starts. DOE cannot make changes to the formula. It's all legislative, so changes take a while to get through the process. And the reason we have EPS is when we first started with state subsidy funding, it all went out to towns based on a per pupil. Everybody had equality. Everybody received the same amount based on a per pupil cost, or a per pupil amount. But what happened was it caused educational outcomes that were not equal. Because there are some towns, as you know, that have the resources for a higher tax base. They're able to provide their students more. And there are towns in rural Maine that don't have a lot of tax base. So their students were not having an equal education. So EPS came into play to cause equity. And with equity, what we do is we look at your town valuations and we determine how much can each town afford to contribute to their cost of education. And by doing this, we are sending out the money. It's just a small part of money, one pie, and we're dividing that up into pieces so that those that need more are getting more, and those that have the potential to raise more locally are receiving a bit less. So when you come to the EPS formula, it's mainly 8 simple steps. First, we review the statute because it can change. Like I said, it's legislative. So we review the statute and we change the formula to align with any statutory changes. Next is data. We collect data from internal and external sources. We then need a per pupil rate to use to determine a cost allocation. Once we do that, we take all of the operational costs added together and we come up with a total cost of education for every single SAU. Every single SAU is done separately. You all have your own individual data that's used, and we come up with a cost for each and every single one of you. Then we need to determine, like I said, how much are you able to contribute? Once we have that, we take your total cost of education, and if you're not able to contribute that total amount, then that's where state share comes in. Once we have the state share only, we make some adjustments and come up with a total subsidy allocation for your town. And that is what is sent to the SAUs each year as a monthly subsidy payment. So it's a very simple process, 8 simple steps. So like I said, once we get through the legislative review, next we need data. Data comes from students, staff, and financial. That all comes from you. We use the data that you provide us. So as I say, data in, data out. So what we get is what we have to use. So please, you'll hear this many times today, please make sure your data is accurate. Please make sure you meet the deadlines. And then beyond the internal data, we also have calculated fields we need, and that's the mill rate, the inflation factor, and a regional adjustment. And then we have teacher retirement and town valuation that come from other Maine departments. So when we have the data and we know what we have to do with the data, we send that out to you in a report called the ED 279. And that report, again, is done for every single SAU. It's done individually for all of you to come up with your ED 279. Those are publicly available. Anybody can go on to the DOE website and the report page. You can look up at all these years. You can look up anybody's SAU, and you can see that ED 279 report. So now I'm going to go through that report step by step to show you how the EPS formula is actually calculated, showing up on your report that you receive. So in section 1, what we're going to do is calculate that elementary and secondary per pupil multiplier rate. And we're basing this on regular education. Those are the students that do not need extra supports in order for education. We're going to use regular education in order to determine a cost allocation in section 2. So in section 1, we begin with a count of students. And for section 1, we are using attending students. Those are the students that are enrolled at your schools, and they are receiving an education at your SAU. So it's all of the students that you have in your schools, in your classrooms. Those are broken out into 4 groupings: pre-KK, 1 to 5, 6 to 8, and 9 to 12. And we do that because each of those has a little bit different student to staff ratio that we will use to calculate an FTE. We use a 2-year average of the 2 most recent years of your October 1st data. If your attendance drops more than 10% or more between 1 year and the next, we will look at a 3-year average for each of those groupings, and we will either use the 2-year or 3-year, whichever is most beneficial to the SAU. So once again, a little plug for data. Please make sure that it's on time and that it's submitted correctly. So once we have the data count, we use that, the student count, we use that to determine an FTE total for EPS. How much is EPS going to allocate for these positions for an FTE for regular education? If you have less than 1,200 students total at your school, then you receive a 90% student to staff ratio. And that is because fewer students, EPS formula allocates a little bit less funding. So I've provided both of those tables for you. And these ratios come directly from statute. And that is what we use to calculate this. So for an EPS FTE, you can see here I've just laid it out for teachers. And for each of those grade groupings, we use the ratio amount provided in statute. We just take the count, divide by the ratio, and that is the FTE. So for teachers at this SAU, the EPS FTE is 127.63. Once we have the EPS FTE, we now need to determine what percentage of a salary is EPS formula going to allocate for a cost for regular education. And to find this percentage of a salary amount, we take that EPS FTE, we divide it by an actual FTE, and that actual FTE comes directly from your data. It's the staff data that you submit. We take the staff that is regular education that has been tagged as regular education and EPS eligible. So we divide the EPS by the actual, and that gives us the percent of EPS that we're going to use. So for this one, we have a 1.02% for teachers. So now again, that is the percent we're going to use for a salary amount that is going to be allocated for regular education. And the salary amount is calculated using a matrix, and that is to bring everybody to the same level. Everybody's teachers, all of the positions within this regular education, all use the same matrix. Everybody starts at the same base level. So we take the percent that we calculated, we multiply it by this salary matrix amount, which I'm going to go through how that is calculated, and we come up with an adjusted EPS salary. So you can see here that when we did the calculations, the EPS FTE was more than what the actual FTE was. So when the matrix salary is 7.7 million, and the adjusted salary is almost 7.9 million. So if the EPS formula feels that more of an FTE is needed than what you have in actual, then that is the adjusted salary is going to be more than what the matrix calculation. If it feels that less is necessary, then it's going to be less. This is not telling you how many teachers, how many guidance, how many nurses. We're not telling you how many of those you need at your school. This is just a formula, and these are the counts we're using as part of that formula based on data and research that was done through the legislature. We then take that adjusted salary amount, and we have to have an elementary and secondary per pupil rate. So we find that by taking that adjusted salary amount, multiplying it by the percent of elementary counts from up in section 1A, and that gives us the total adjusted salary for elementary. And then for secondary, we just take the total adjusted salary and we subtract the elementary amount to give us the secondary salary amount. So this is a look at the salary matrices that we use when we calculate that funding in section 1B. Every position that is a regular education position, we use this same salary. It's base salary, and it's increased based on years of experience, highest degree earned, and then the FTE is actually reported for that position. These are the positions within those matrices. As you can see, it's for regular education only. Those other costs for special education, career and technical, gifted and talented, etc., those are calculated separately in a different section of the ED 279. So again, section 1 is regular education only. I do want to point out that teachers, guidance, and librarians must have a BA in their staff data in order to qualify. So they have to have a minimum of a BA. If they have one and it's not recorded in your staff data, then that position will not be included in the EPS formula. So again, back to data, please make sure it's accurate. So this is just a quick sample of data that we would receive from an SAU for their staff. This includes all staff. It includes both regular education, special education, gifted and talented. All of your staff are included in this file. So we have a line for every single staff member at your school, and that is what we use to calculate those salary amounts. So we do this individually for every single staff member to come up with a total salary amount for section 1B. So the next few slides are just to go step by step through that process. So for the first page, it's teachers, guidance, and librarians. And as you can see, we took the data and we look and see if they're EPS. So we can see here that Chuck Roast is, yes, he's an EPS. We look at how many years of educational experience he has, and that's 2 years. He has a baccalaureate degree, and he has a full FTE of 1. So we simply go to the chart, and we can see that for educational experience from 1 to 5, with a BA only, that the salary amount in that matrix calculation is $45,448. I want to point out that when you do your staff data, you also include what you actually pay. What you actually pay is not used in the EPS formula, but we do use it when there are legislative changes. such as the minimum teacher changes or the minimum hourly, we use this field to calculate those differences and to provide extra support if it's legislated that we do so. For ed techs and clericals, for ed techs we look at whether they're a Tech 1, Tech 2, Tech 3. Then we look at the years of experience and what the FTE is that you report. Same with clerical, it is simply the years of experience and the FTE. And again, we're using a base salary. The salary is inflated each year by an inflation factor, and then it's reviewed every 3 years to see if there needs to be updates more than that inflation factor. For health, it's the same. I wanted to point out here that for this health position, it's reported that they only work a 0.5 FTE. So you can see the calculation here is that 0.5 times the salary down in the chart, and that gives you the EPS salary amount. School administrators, which again are school level only, they're calculated a bit differently. We use the total count of students at the school where they're a principal. So here we can see that Sea Legs has a student enrollment count of 174. So we go to the chart, we look at 125 to 174, and that is the salary that they receive as a principal. Assistant principals use a different salary structure. It's a little bit lower as an assistant principal, but it still uses that student count at your schools. So again, student count is brought into the salary matrix for principals and assistant principals, so that can make a difference in your subsidy allocation. So once we have, again, calculated that for every staff member, and we have the total amounts for the elementary and secondary salaries, we then simply calculate benefits using the percent of benefits which is in statute. So it's just simply multiplying the percent of the benefit by the salary amount broken out by each of the positions that they have in the formula. Section 1D is other per pupil costs, and these are set rates that are inflated each year by the inflation factor. And for this, we're using those counts from 1A, and we're multiplying it by the rate that's specified, and that is giving us an amount for other per pupil costs. Finally, in section 1, we have what we call the regional adjustment. And Paul is going to describe how this is going to change going forward. This is showing you how it's been done from FY27 and before. So what we do here is we look at your salary, adjusted salary amount, and as I noted, we used the same average salary for everybody across the state. And what the regional adjustment does is it adjusts based on the labor market area for your SAU. Some areas you pay a little more, some areas pay less. So this adjustment is adjusting those salaries up or down based on the labor market area. So if you have a cost of living that is seen as less than average, then your amount is reduced. More than average, your amount is increased. This is on salaries and substitute teachers only. Those are the only amounts in section 1 that are reduced or raised by a regional adjustment. So once we have that regional adjustment, we subtract or add that to the total cost allocations, the total allocations for regular education, and we divide that by the number of students from up in 1A, and that gives us a per pupil multiplier rate based on the cost of regular education for elementary and secondary. I do want to point out, again, this is just a rate we are going to use to determine cost allocations in section 2. It is not a rate per pupil that you receive in subsidy. It's just a multiplier rate. So that is section 1. Any quick questions on section 1?
They all get it. They all get it.
Oh, good.
It's awesome.
Phew. So section 2, what we start with is the operating cost allocations. And this is what it costs you to provide education for the students that you're responsible for. So section 2 uses subsidizable pupils. Section 1 was attending. Those are the students that attend your schools. Subsidizable pupils are those pupils that reside in your towns that you are responsible to educate. So section 2 uses subsidizable. It uses only a 2-year average for K-8 and 9-12. Pre-K is different in section 2. Pre-K uses the most recent October 1 count only. So it's current year only for pre-K, and that is because some of the SAUs have expanding or new pre-K programs that they're starting that have been approved through the early childhood team at DOE, and they are given estimated counts in the current year. So for in operating cost in section 2, pre-K is current year only. So for section 2B, it's simply the basic allocation, cost allocation, and that takes the counts from up in section 2A, those subsidizable pupils, 2-year average for K-8 and 9-12, and current year for pre-K. And it simply multiplies those counts by the rates we calculated in section 1, and that is your basic cost allocation to provide education in section 2. Then we get to 2C where we have weighted counts. Weighted counts give a little bit more for some populations that need extra supports. The main one here is the economic disadvantage percent. And you'll hear many times today how important the economic disadvantage count is in your student data. It is huge. This can impact your subsidy now severely, and as we go forward, it's going to be even more of a factor. So to determine this economic disadvantage percentage, we simply look at the counts of economic disadvantage that you provide in your student data. We look at the total subsidy counts that you provide in your data, and we divide the economic disadvantaged by the total subsidy counts, and we do that for 3 groupings. We look at it from the elementary, secondary, and total. We do those 3 calculations, and we take the highest one of those, and the highest percentage is what is used for all of your economic disadvantaged students in section 2. So the math is simply, we take that percentage times the counts, times the weight, times the rate from section 1, and that gives you your cost allocation for economic disadvantage. In section 2C, that is 0.15, and then we have another weight for economic disadvantage down in section 2D, and that is 0.05. So that means in section 2, your economic disadvantaged counts provide a weight of 0.20 in additional supports. So again, those economic disadvantage counts are extremely important. The other one that is weighted in section 2C are the multilingual learners, and that weight is dependent on the number of multilingual learners at your SAU. So 1 to 15 is 0.7, 16 to 250 is 0.5, 251 or more is 0.525. And we use the same weight for all of the grade groupings based on that total count at your school. So if you have 250 MLL students and you have a rate of 0.5, we will use that for your pre-K, even if you have 10. We use that for each one of the grade groupings. So it's the same weight for all of your students based on that total count at your school. Then in section 2, again, we have that extra weight for economic disadvantage. We also have an additional weighted amount for pre-K and K2 students, and that is because those littles, you need more supports for education than the older students. So that's why this weight is here. And again, for pre-K, we use current year, and for K2, we use a 2-year average. For student assessment and technology resources, those are flat rates that are increased each year by an inflation factor, and that is simply the counts multiplied by the rates, and those are your cost allocations for those amounts. Finally, in section 2, we have what we call the isolated small school adjustment. These are for schools that are both isolated and small. I'm not going to go through the whole process, but this is a manual process for us. We use Google Maps and student counts. So if you've closed a school, opened a school, sometimes we miss it. So please, if you think you may have an eligible school now, reach out to us and we'll do the calculation. It does have to meet these criteria, and you have to meet both isolated and small. Island schools are different. They have their own separate calculations as an island school. But once we get through section 2, that is the total amount of your operating allocation to educate students in your SAU. So we took the regular cost of education, we determined a per pupil rate based on the regular cost of education, and we used those rates in section 2 to calculate an operating allocation for your SAU. In section 3, this is where those other allocations come in. And I is going to come up in a minute to talk about sections 3A, 1 to 4. I'm going to quickly go over the other pieces. The approved bus allocation. These are allocations that are provided by the approved bus program at DOE. And I have given you a contact for that person, Cheryl Brackett. She's the one to reach out to for an approved bus allocation approval. Keep in mind that the bus allocation is in section 3. That means it's state and local share for bus allocations. So minimum contributors that receive a bus allocation, as they are a minimum contributor and don't get a state share in section 4, then the state share for the bus would be 0. But even though you're getting a state share of 0, your approved bus is still getting removed from the resources available for the bus program, because the bus program just looks at the number of buses, has no idea about your EPS subsidy. So if you are always a minimum contributor, we ask that you don't put in for an approved bus, because you're not going to receive state funding for that. If you're on the line, and some years you are, some years you aren't, please go ahead and submit for an approved bus, because the years that you are not a minimum contributor, you would receive some allocation for the approved bus. Then we have the teacher retirement amount. This amount comes from Maine PERS. They send this to us using data that you provide to them. That's another very important piece. Please make sure your data that you're sending to Maine PERS is accurate. We had a SAU a couple years ago who had very inaccurate data submitted to Maine PERS, and this hurt their EPS subsidy by an extreme amount. And it took a lot of work to get it approved to allow us to use a updated Maine PERS value in this field. So data, again, very important. And then finally, we have the debt service allocations, the approved leases and lease purchases. Those are for the modular buildings that you may be leasing or lease to purchase. And those are approved through the school facilities team at DOE. And then an insured value factor. And that is for the towns that tuition students to Maine private schools for tuition. So then Ida is going to come up and talk about special ed and the other pieces.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Sometimes my voice does not carry, so I'm going to try to project. I'm Ida Batista, the school finance manager. I've been at the department for 10 years, and prior to being under the hood of the formula, I was on the MEPRI research team for about 10 years. So I've seen its evolution. And Section 3A is highly, highly dependent on your financials. Can't stress your financials enough and the accuracy of that data. So I will just get into 3A. 3A1 is your gifted and talented. So when we are allocating this funds, we are looking at your Q1 budgets, program code 4900, so gifted and talented, all costs, all expenditure costs in your budget, compared to your Q4 actual expenditures for program 4900. So for FY28, we'll be looking at your 26 data, and we are going to compare those two numbers and take the lesser of the two, which is what's considered your base allocation. Okay, and then we'll inflate it, and that's what you'll have as an allocation for that. We don't approve certain expenditures. It's what's in your data for that 4900 program code. Special ed. Everybody loves special ed. I'm going to say the obvious. It's growing exponentially. It's a very heavy part of the calculation. We know that this formula is not necessarily working as correctly as we can, and it defaults to your expenditures pretty heavily. This is only K-12. I'm going to express that again. It's K-12. I'm going to tell you how you can essentially come up with the allocation that we come up with. Okay, again, we're looking at your Q4s. There is in MEFs, once you've submitted your data, Terry has reviewed it, it's approved, and you certify it, we can actually it'll migrate your data. There is a report in MEFs that tells you exactly, it's a special ed report, what we're using. It is general fund. It's the program 2000 range with the exception of 2600, which is pre-K. And that's a whole different fund that Paula will talk to later. It's salary benefits for teachers, administrators, ed techs, temps, related service professionals that you may hire on or contracted services. It's PD, it's legal, and tuition, okay? And then we subtract out from your expenditures revenues. So revenues for tuitions in, state agency client receipts and foster care receipts, any Maine Care revenue that you get or Maine Care transfers that you do, okay? Those are the expenditures, special ed expenditures that are used in your formula, okay? So the formula, so I'm going to go through the formula steps. So step 1 through 4 of these 6, we're going to call the formula amount, okay? And I'm going to walk you through how we do it, and I'm going to give you a shortcut for you to quickly see, particularly since the formula amount, generally speaking, has been fairly good with very small SAUs, but not so great with the bigger, medium to larger SAUs. So the first thing we do is we look at your subsidizable student counts, your average, so section 2A, line 3, and we create a weighted average using your EPS rates from section 1, okay? So we multiply the subsidizable elementary students by your elementary rate plus your subsidizable average secondary students times your secondary EPS rate. That gives you a 1, like an SAU weighted EPS rate. Statute says right now the prevalence is 15%. We know that that's low. I think the average in the state is probably 20–21%, but we have to go by statute. And for the first 15% of your subsidizable students that are special ed, we give you your weighted EPS rate times 1.5 times the number of students. So as an example, let's just say you have an SAU with 100 students, that the law says the first 15% of those would get that one, of special ed students would get that 1.5 weight. But let's say your SAU has 100 total students, subsidizable students, and 20 special ed students. So those additional 5 will get a weight of 0.38 times your weighted EPS rate, okay? If you are a district with a very small SAU special ed population under 20, we give you an additional weight of 0.29. Then we get to step 4. In all transparency, that step is broken. It's been broken since the inception of the, I think the first year or 2 of the formula. We had the data for it to identify high cost in district. We don't any further. So what's happening there is where if you, when that data was there, you had high cost in district, we're just inflating that amount. That's all that's happening there. We know it's broken, all transparency. We know it's broken, we're telling you it's broken. So then we go to step 5. Step 5 is based on your EFS 07. That is a survey report that we do on prior year out of district placement special ed students. They could be public, they could be regional, private, all your out of district placement students. It is open now. It opened July 1. It closes October 15th. We do a review of the data you submit. It's extensive. Because it's prior year, if you had an enrollment, like a kid that you know that was enrolled somewhere, say, this would be for 29 for this summer, and that enrollment is not correct or in there, we cannot correct it after the fact. So this is just, we can't do anything for 28 because it's 26 enrollments, but this is just to say, please make sure your students are enrolled correctly because we can't put them in after the fact. But that report is open right now, and we ask that you try to complete it as quickly as possible because we do manually review it. And what I look at, once that data is reviewed and you've signed off on it, so your special ed director starts it, your business office signs off on it, says that the money looks correct and it's coming from the right fund, is we look at placement based on state average threshold. And the state average comes from the first 3 components. Divided by the state totals of those first 3 components divided by the state total special ed kids. Right now that's about $10,375. And it says, the law says that if you have a placement in a regional program, it's 2 times that $10,000, $10,004. If it's a public placement, it's 3 times that amount. If it's private, it's 4 times that amount. And so that amount above that, so let's say you have a private placement student at 50,000, and it's about 10 to 42, we'll give you 8,000 in that line. So we surmise all your placements, and that becomes line 3A3 in your ED 279, okay? What I call step 6, the gap adjustment. In our paperwork, it is called special ed expenditures not otherwise funded. Okay, so that means like not your federal funds. So we're looking at that gap between what you're actually expending versus what those first 4 steps are saying. Okay. So I pull up your expenditure data for the prior year. So for FY28, I will look at your 26 data for those, for the information that I told you earlier, for the salaries, benefits. I will subtract out the Maine Care, tuition received. And then I also subtract out the high cost out of district because you're getting that in a separate line. I then divide that by the number of kids that you had in special ed in 26 and get your FY26 special ed per pupil rate. I then multiply it by your 27 count. And I say, is this comparable to what you spent last year? Okay. So as an example, let's just say the formula, the first 4 steps say you get 7.5 million. Okay. You have a current count of 100 students and a prior year per pupil of 7,500. Okay. So it's a wash. It says that you won't get an adjustment because you'll get that 7.5 million. If you have, let's just say the prior year was 8,500 and you spent 8 million, it's not going to give you 8.5 million. It's going to defer back down to what you actually spent, that $8 million. Okay? And so what I recommend that you do is you go right to line 6. Go right to line 6 to this gap analysis, take your prior years, figure out your special ed. As I said, it's a report on our, if you want exact numbers, pull the report, figure out what your special ed per pupil is for that year, times it by your current students, look at what you expended and take the lesser of the two, and that's probably going to be your allocation. Okay? Any questions on special ed? Okay, transportation. Transportation also looks at your quarter 4 financials. The report looks at, again, we're always state and local funds only, so general fund, program code 000, function 2700, all object codes except for buildings, land improvements, buses, equipment, principal or lease purchases. Those are excluded. We also subtract out any revenue that, general fund revenue that you get for services, transportation services that you provide to others that you're getting like a fee for, sales and refunds. So we subtract that out. Again, there's a report, so you can find out exactly what the number we'll be using in this calculation is. So what we do is we say, what was your prior year transportation allocation? And we inflate it by our inflation factor. We then take the expenditures, the net expenditures, and we take 90% of them and 105%, and we compare your inflated last year's allocation. So if it falls under that 90% of your expenditures, we'll bring your allocation to that 90%. If it falls above that 105%, we will pull it down to that 105%. If it falls in the middle, that will be your allocation. Okay. Any other questions? Any questions? Yes?
It was more about on the special education part. When you say K-12,
yes.
Does that go by age or does it go by K-12? I'm thinking about like 18 to 22-year-olds.
They're in there.
Okay.
They're in there. That was a law change 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So 3? Yeah, so they're in there. Any further? Okay.
You had mentioned the 15% factor for special ed.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a 20% factor for your basically over-identified, what is the percentage reimbursement for that additional 5%?
Okay, so you said an R word that Paula, it just makes her cringe. We never do reimbursement, we do allocation.
Okay, allocation.
Okay.
Sorry, Paula.
Side note. So the extra.
So allocation.
Yes, thank you. So the allocation, so your first 15% would fall under line 1 here. You'd get that 1.5. And anything above that, any count above that is that 0.38. So it says that you have economies of scale, right? That you've already hit your base program under that 1.5 and you need a little bit more for every extra kid. Any further questions? Okay, thank you. I'll be back for CTE, but I'm gonna give this back to Donna.
So now that we have your cost allocations totaled from section 2 and 3, those two added together, that is what we're going to use to determine state and local share in section 4. So if you are an individual town SAU, you are responsible for 100% of that cost allocation. But if you are a multi-municipality town, we have to determine how much of that cost allocation from section 2 and 3 each town is responsible for. So in order to do this, we use the subsidizable pupil counts, the total at that SAU, and then we look at the number from each town. How much does each town send to the SAU? And we divide the amount of the town count to the total count, and that is the percent of the total cost allocation that you are responsible for based on the total amount for the SAU. We use subsidizable pupil counts as a 2-year average, which is the same as section 2. However, if you are a multiple municipality SAU, we remove any superintendent transfers from that count. So if you have superintendent transfers included in section 2, those are removed in section 4. So those numbers, that's why those numbers may not be exact between sections 2 and sections 4 when you look at your totals. So once we again have that percent that you're responsible for, we take the total cost allocations from sections 2 and 3, we multiply that by your percent, and that gives you the total cost allocation distribution for those. Then we also look at section 3 for that debt allocation. And for this SAU, only Town A has a debt allocation as they have an insured value factor, because of the 3 towns, they are the only town that is tuitioning students to a Maine private school. So that is why Town A has that total debt allocation in their total cost distribution. So we can see here that Town A is responsible for 9.7 million out of that total cost allocation above in section 1, 4B. So now we need to determine, we know how much you are responsible for, we need to determine how much you are able to contribute. To do that, we use a mill rate, and this EPS mill rate is for EPS only, has nothing to do with your town tax mill rate. What this mill rate is the mill rate needed to cover the cost of the 45% of the total cost of education. So we have the total cost of education, we remove the state share of 55%, and then that 45% of local share. What is the lowest mill rate we need in order to make sure that that share is 45%? In addition to the mill rate, we use your town valuation. This comes directly from the Maine Revenue Service. We cannot change this, unfortunately, for you. It comes directly from them. What we do is we look at either the current year or an average of the 3 most recent years, and we use the lesser of those 2 amounts. So we either use current year or the 3-year average in order to determine your ability to contribute. The Maine Revenue Service posts these every year in January. So if you want to look at your 2026 valuations for, from the Maine Revenue Service, just go to their site. It's already posted, and you can see that amount. And then look at whether that, the current 2026, or the 3-year average of the 3 most recent is less. And that will be the valuation that we will use in FY28 to determine your ability to contribute. Keep in mind there are going to be changes in FY28 that Paula will talk in a little bit, so that will affect how this is calculated. So for Town A, their ability to contribute based on their mill rate, their valuation, they can contribute for just over 4.3 million. So we know that Town A is responsible for 9.7 million. We have now found they can only contribute 4.3 million. So the state share is the difference of those two. So we simply take the total cost allocation, subtract what you are able to contribute, and that is the state share. So for Town A, that state share is just about $5.4 million. You'll note in this SAU that towns B and C, neither of those receive a state share, because when you look at their ability to contribute in Section 4B, that is equal to or above the amount they are responsible for in Section 4A. So this is how the state and local share is determined. We take that total cost allocation, we divide it out by how much each town is responsible for, then we look at your valuation to see how much you're able to contribute, and then if that is less than what you are responsible for, that is the state share. So as I noted before, towns B and C do not have a state share. So they are able to cover all the costs up in Section 4A. But when you break down the math, you can see that they are actually contributing at a lower mill expectation than Town A. So when you calculate Town C actual mill rate based on their state cost allocation and their evaluation, they're actually contributing at a mill rate for their town of 1.221. That is the mill rate for Town C. And that is because you never go above, you are either contributing that valuation amount or the cost distribution, whichever is less. So if you're able to pay based in Section 4, if you're able to pay more than what you are required, we do not ask you to pay more. You only have to pay the lesser of those two. So Town C, again, can cover all of their costs. They are contributing at a 1.221. But if we looked at Town A and did the same calculation, if they were responsible and had to cover their total cost share up in 4A, their mill rate would be over 12.6. So Town A would be contributing at a 12.6 mill rate versus Town C, which is contributing at a 1.221. This is a quick spreadsheet that we put together. We can do these for anybody. Just reach out if you would like one. And what it is it's comparing one year to the next. And it's taking the major points in the ED 279, the EPS formula, where are the points that will most likely make a difference in the state share between the 2 years. So for this SAU, you can see that they have a decrease in attending and subsidy pupils. So they have fewer pupils. In Section 3, this is a big one, special ed allocation. They have a lesser amount in their special ed allocation, and that is due to a decrease in special ed counts, and also likely due to a lesser amount of expenditure in special ed. Then when we get to Section 4, you can see this town, this SAU, had an increase of over 18% in their valuation, and that is using a 3-year average. So they had a huge increase in valuation, they had a decrease in counts, they had a decrease in special education, and between the 2 years, their state share was over $435,000 less between the 2 years. So that is Section 4, state and local share. Any questions? So Section 5 is where we get into adjustments, and these are state share only adjustments. This means that the state is providing a bit of funding to those minimum contributors, because we want everybody to have a slice of the pie. There are adjustments in 5 in order to do that. These are the minimum contributor adjustments that we have. The one that we see most is the minimum special ed adjustment, and that is 50% of your special education costs in Section 3. The other one is the minimum state allocation, and that is a 5% calculation, and it's based on that 5% of the multiplier rates in section 1, and that is that calculation. And you receive either special ed or minimum state. You do not receive both. So you receive the one that is the highest of those two. Then if you receive one of those two, you are eligible to see if you can receive also a minimum economic disadvantage. So again, economic disadvantage, economic counts, disadvantage counts, extremely important in this formula. So we look at whether your disadvantage percentage in section 2 is higher than the state average. You must have the minimum special ed or the minimum state allocation adjustment, and you must operate a school. If you meet those 3 criteria, then you're eligible for this adjustment. And this just shows you in detail how we do those calculations if you'd like to take a look later. And then in 5B, we have what we call the state share only adjustment. So in section 5, the state share goes up, the local share goes down. In section 5B, only the state share is adjusted. And these are the costs for career and technical education, education service centers, and then the state-approved principal and interest debt for approved construction projects. This one used to be in section 3. It has been moved over to section 5B to state only because we needed to remove that local share. If it was in section 3, there was a local share contributed to this state debt allocation. So now it is state share only. And when you look below, you can see we have a percentage of state to local share, and those 2 percentage differences are only from section 5A. So if you are not a minimum contributor, you don't have an adjustment in 5A, those 2 are going to be exactly the same. Here you can see they did have a minimum contributor adjustment up in 5A, so the share before and after are shown there. So the state share increased from 25.88 to 29.06. And Ida is going to come up and give you a little bit on career and technical education.
Hello. Career and technical education, there's 27 of them, regions and centers in the state. I feel like it's important for all SAUs to sort of really understand this part of the calculation. What we're seeing right now is that a lot of the CTEs are having satellite programs in other SAUs, which is wonderful. I want to say that a satellite program is not a franchise of the CTE. It is a member of the parent CTE, because we have had situations where they're like, oh, we have a satellite there, and it's like, and that's SAU is running it, and it's like, no, that's yours. It's not a franchise, it's yours. And so the importance of knowing the formula, particularly if you're going to host a satellite program, is that generally speaking, it's the SAUs that are hosting that'll hire the teacher, so that teacher will be under your contract, and you'll have to negotiate with the parent CTE to make sure that your costs are being met, and that it's as good for the CTE center as it is for your students and your budgets. CTE is money is strictly for CTE. It cannot be used for other general fund costs. If you have carryover, it's still got to be used for CTE. And it is formula based. There is no, even though I pull your expenditure data to review it and I pull your staff data, it's strictly formula based. And we do have resources on our website that will tell you the parameters, and there's an Excel tool, so if you say you're in negotiations and you're running an exploratory, you can get an estimate of what allocation will be specific to that program with that number of students. So what the formula, I also want to say, given there have been a bunch, I think it's slowing down a little bit about the new programs because we do try to front load new programs. When a new program is developed, that essentially locks up money, which contributes to the mill rate. And what we've had happening is that we've had a lot of new programs. People have not been able to hire teachers, and then they have to return the money. So in October, I look at your enrollment counts, and if I don't see enrollment counts for a program, and I haven't been told, I have to pull back that money. So it's, if you know that you're not going to run a program, the sooner we know it, the more you can sort of balance out your budget, and you're not getting, you know, what feels like an Ida Nastygram. I feel bad when I have to do it, but essentially I have to retract the money. So what's in the formula is a category called instruction. It's teachers. It's by program pupil count, which allocates an FTE, and there's a parameter. It's a state average of the teachers. For years now, we have been trying to do a salary matrix using your, because what we hear from CTEs is like, I'm hiring a plumber, and the plumber's got plumbing experience. So, no, you're hiring a teacher who has plumbing experience. You're not hiring a plumber. But we've been trying to sort of create like an allocation. We have, when we look at your data, and again, this is about the importance of data, the research does look at your data, and as a former researcher, I can tell you, I cannot believe that your plumber has had experience in plumbing that was prior to their conception. I just can't. It's not reasonable. So we've had plenty of data issues with that. So we use an average for that parameter. We have ed techs that are specified per program for specific programs, and that's allocated by pupil count. Clinical supervisors for specific medical programs, and it's 8 per 8 students. We have subs, that's per pupil amount in instruction. For central admin, everybody gets a director. Assistant directors are allocated by school enrollment. Only CTE regions have are allocated 1 FTE business manager. We assume that for centers that are in SAUs that they are potentially utilizing or purchasing business services from their SAU. Clerical staff, we mandate 1 minimum FTE or 1 per 245 students, and other admin costs is 16% of those central office salaries and benefits. For operation and maintenance, we look at your square footage, and it's your square footage by 6.7. Supplies, there's specific supply program costs that we allocate out, plus per pupil amount for the students in that program. And for student and staff supports, there is, for your counselors, your guidance counselors, we do it by enrollment. It's either 1 or 1.5 that we allocate out. Every CTE gets a coordinator, 1 FTE coordinator. Program transportation, that's from your quarter 4s. It has to be specific to the program. So you cannot use the general 3000 CTE code. It has to be specific to a program in that 2700. So I'll pull that amount and inflate it. And then you get per pupil amounts for tech, co-curricular, PD, safety, and assessment. And as I said, there are resources on our site for that. Okay. Donna?
So I just have a couple more slides. We're going over a little bit, and I apologize, but we'll finish up here really quickly. So once we have that total allocation amount, the state share has been calculated. Section 6 is what we call your checkbook, and this is your monthly payments that you're going to receive each month. This will change depending on adjustments made. I forgot to mention on the previous slide, Maine Care Seed. Maine Care Seed is not a reduction in your subsidy. Maine Care Seed is a bill that the state is paying on your behalf. So we're using your subsidy to pay a bill for you, and that is why those costs are removed. It is not a reduction in your subsidy. I'm going to finish up quickly with a couple of myths and facts. One we hear is that EPS dictates how locals spend their funds. Absolutely not true. EPS is a formula used to calculate your state subsidy, and in no way do we tell you how to spend those funds once you receive them. As Ida said, the only exception is that CTE allocation must be used for CTE. The next is that the state funds contribute 55% of my local school budget. State funds cover 55% of the statewide aggregate cost of education based on the legislation for this. The actual state share each one of you receives is based on this whole formula and varies widely based on those property evaluations. All staff should be accounted for in Section 1. That is definitely not true. Section 1 is regular education only. So any staff that is not regular education should not be showing up in Section 1 of your ED 279, as that can hurt your subsidy allocation. So again, data accuracy, extremely important. And then finally, not really a myth, but just sort of a plug, that missing your data submission deadlines is inconsequential. It is extremely consequential. The EPS formula is based on the statewide total cost of education. We cannot calculate that total cost of education until we have data from every single SAU. So if we don't have your data on time, we don't have one SAU, this process cannot begin until we have everybody's data. And we are required by law to get these ED 279s out to you on or before February 1st. And we have a very short time frame. I've told you that it's legislation, it's data, and it's math, which is true, but there's a lot of legislation, data, and math that go into the formula. And that is it for EPS.
Any questions? Go ahead, yes.
So, when you were talking about the bus reimbursement allocation and you said a minimum receipt.
I heard reimbursement.
Sorry, allocation. Scratch the reimbursement piece. But you do buy the bus. You have to buy the bus again. But anyway, you said if you're a minimum receiver.
Minimum contributor, yep.
An application, but obviously I'm made up of 3 communities, one of which is a minimum receiver.
Yep.
So I just want to clarify that because I still get reimbursement.
You still get an allocation of funding in your formula.
Allocation of funding.
Yep, you do, even though there are a couple of minimum contributor towns in your SAU, yes. So in that case, overall, as an SAU, you're not a minimum contributor. You have a town that gets an adjustment because they are at that level, but not as an overall. So overall, yes. As an SAU, you're not an overall minimum contributor, so yes, you should still apply for a bus allocation for state funding towards an allocation of funding. You know, but there are others that are minimum contributors overall, and that funding just never gets to them, and so it does take away from others using that limited funding towards bus allocation, bus purchase allocations.
So it's more municipal district versus SAU or...
Versus a combined RSU, yeah. Yeah.
And then just my second one is, and over the years I've heard different things, so can we just clarify, like when we're on section 1, what's an ed tech's FTE? Is it hours? Like how many hours that ed tech's working? Like,
so that's going to really be, and that's why we've asked you all to put it in. We aren't going to calculate that for you. We don't know. It's going to be different for every SAU. A full-time ed tech in your SAU may be 30 hours. I don't know. And in another SAU, it may be 40. So that's why we ask you to tell us what is your contract for your SAUs in your for your ed techs in your SAU, say a full-time ed tech is. So that's why we ask you to put that in, because we wouldn't know. It's different all over the state. Different contracts mean different full-time FTEs, and so we're not telling you how to calculate that.
Any questions you have that aren't covered in this video? Go to maine.gov/DOE/funding and click on Contact Us. There you'll find the contacts for the school finance team. Expect a response within 24 to 48 hours. Click on another video within the playlist to continue watching the training.